Millionaire left his phone at home, pregnant wife, read messages from the mistress, and made a plan. A silent phone on a marble-topped kitchen counter can hold the seeds of heartbreak, betrayal, and startling revelation. In a quiet neighborhood in suburban Miami, Grace Moreno discovered her husband's phone buzzing throughout the morning. Mark Moreno, a self-made millionaire, revered for his business acumen, had left it behind in haste. The moment Grace glanced at the screen, her world fractured. The words from an unknown contact stirred both nausea and fury. He was hers, yet these messages spoke of secrets, passion, and promises. Instantly, Grace felt her unborn child shift, as if sensing her turmoil. Thus began her silent plan, set to unravel an empire built on lies. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows of Mark and Grace Moreno's luxurious home. The white porcelain floors reflected the morning rays, creating a soft glow that filled every corner of their sprawling living room. Grace, 6 months pregnant with their first child, had risen early to keep up with her daily yoga routine. The doctor had recommended gentle stretching to alleviate her back pains, and she found solace in the rhythmic breathing that momentarily silenced her worries. Mark, her husband of 3 years, stood in the foyer rummaging through his designer briefcase. Dressed in a crisp charcoal suit that accentuated his lean, athletic physique, he looked every bit the successful entrepreneur he was. Though their house was a testament to Mark's formidable wealth, he often reminded Grace that he had started from humble beginnings. He had built an import-export business, traveling across Asia and Europe to secure lucrative contracts that multiplied his fortune year after year. On this particular morning, Mark was noticeably frazzled. A business meeting loomed, and he seemed preoccupied, hurriedly tossing papers back and forth. Over the past few months, Grace had noticed a shift in his demeanor. He was often distracted, quick to anger, and vanished on mysterious phone calls whenever his mobile rang. Her heart clenched whenever doubt crossed her mind. He had always been caring, always supportive, but that intangible something felt off. After hastily kissing Grace on the forehead, Mark rushed out the door, nearly colliding with their housekeeper, Maria Vasquez, who had just arrived. Grace followed him to say goodbye. She managed to call out, "Don't forget your phone, Mark," but in his frenzy, he barely heard her. He hurried into his gleaming black Tesla, leaving his phone face down on the kitchen table. Grace shrugged off the moment at first. As she turned back inside, she paused. The phone, sleek and expensive, lay there as if beckoning her. A million questions raced through her mind. She'd never had reason to doubt him until recently. She decided to tidy up before summoning the courage to pick it up. The last thing she wanted was to appear paranoid or controlling. But curiosity gnawed at her. Maria, sensing Grace's unease, offered a reassuring smile. "Senora, it's good to sit down a bit. You have to think about your baby too." Grace rubbed her belly, an unconscious gesture she made when anxious. She thanked Maria and tried to push away the nagging suspicion, but her stomach churned with an unnamed dread. When the phone buzzed for the third time within 5 minutes, Grace felt an impending sense of doom that wouldn't let her ignore it anymore. She approached the phone tentatively, as if it were a coiled snake ready to strike. It vibrated once more, revealing a text message preview. Before her mind had fully registered what she was doing, she unlocked the device. Never in a million years could she have imagined how one morning oversight, Mark forgetting his phone, would unleash a series of revelations, heartbreaks, and alliances that would forever change her life. Grace's hands trembled as the phone unlocked. Though Mark had never explicitly forbidden her from using his phone, it was a tacit understanding in their relationship that each respected the other's privacy. But the abruptness of Mark's recent behavior and the repeated message alerts compelled Grace to put caution aside. The screen displayed an array of missed calls and text messages. At the top was an unknown contact labeled with just a heart emoji. Grace's pulse quickened, and she tapped it. What she saw next left her short of breath. Heart emoji, I miss you already. Last night was unforgettable. Heart emoji, are we still on for next week at the Delilah restaurant in Vegas? Heart emoji, good morning, handsome. Thinking about you. Shock rippled through Grace's entire being. The blood drained from her face, and she had to steady herself against the counter. For a moment, she contemplated the possibility this was some spam or marketing scheme, but the context of the messages and their tone made that impossible. They were intimate, personal, brimming with affection. Her worst fears began to crystallize. A mistress, someone Mark was seeing on the side. Her mind darted through memories, seeking a time or place that might have hinted at an affair. Mark's recent trips to overseas shipments, the late nights at the office, locked behind layers of strict deadlines. The occasional smell of perfume that did not belong to her on his shirt collars incidents he'd brushed off as incidental contact at social gatherings. Feeling nauseous, Grace shut her eyes. Her stomach churned with a cocktail of dread and heartbreak. The baby gave a gentle kick, as if sensing the turmoil that coursed through her body. She ran her hand over her belly protectively, tears threatening to spill. Still, a part of her clung to the hope that this might be a misunderstanding. With trembling determination, she scrolled further. The conversation thread was filled with flirty banter, plans for rendezvous, and countless photos, some of Mark, some of the other woman, a striking brunette with expensive taste in clothing. Photos from boutique hotels, lavish dinners, even weekend trips. Grace recognized the skyline in the background of one shot, New York City. Mark had claimed to be in Boston on that particular weekend for a quick conference. A new pang of betrayal tightened in her chest. The woman's name appeared in one of the earlier messages, Valentina. That name echoed in Grace's mind like a discordant bell, heralding the collapse of her world. She felt both fury and heartbreak, grappling with how to confront Mark, what to do next. But confrontation would be impulsive, and Grace was not impulsive by nature. She was calculating, patient, a skill she had learned, growing up in a family where money was scarce, but resilience abounded. Wiping away tears, Grace realized she had to think about her unborn child and the life she was building, or thought she was building, with Mark. She couldn't let his betrayal destroy her. She had to be strategic, silent. She had to make a plan. The initial shock gave way to a cold, methodical clarity. Grace had been raised by her grandmother, Marisol Hernandez, a formidable woman who taught her that survival was not about brute force, but about cunning and resolve. Grace's first instinct was to fling the phone across the room in anger, but she stayed her hand. This was no time for rashness. Still trembling, she methodically read through every text she could find. Some messages dated back months, indicating that Mark's affair had been ongoing for quite some time. Anger flared in Grace, not just at Mark, but at herself for not noticing the signs earlier. She was determined not to let her emotions control her next move. She took screenshots of every damning message, forwarding them to her own phone. She then placed Mark's phone back on the table, exactly as she had found it, making sure to erase any trace of her snooping. Next, she opened the safe in Mark's office. She had a key one Mark had given her when they moved into the house, insisting he had nothing to hide. Inside, she found stacks of important documents, property deeds in Coral Gables, a penthouse in New York City, and a luxury condo in Los Angeles. There were also stock certificates for his company, Moreno Global Trading, and a life insurance policy with Grace listed as the primary beneficiary. As she pored over the documents, Grace realized the magnitude of Mark's empire. Much of it bore her name, either as a co-owner or beneficiary. If Mark thought she was a passive bystander in their marriage, he had overlooked just how entwined her legal standing was within his holdings. A plan began to crystallize. If Mark was capable of betraying her now, while she was pregnant, who knew what else he was hiding? Perhaps hidden accounts or new properties not yet recorded in the safe. She recalled stories she'd heard from her friend, Elizabeth Carter, who had endured a messy divorce from her CEO husband. Elizabeth discovered too late that she had been cut out of assets because her husband set up shell companies and funneled money away. Grace refused to face a similar fate. She snapped photos of the most critical documents, ensuring she had evidence of everything. The child in her womb depended on her ability to protect them. After carefully returning each document, she locked the safe and returned the key to its hidden drawer. Heart pounding, she walked back into the living room. Her phone felt heavy in her pocket, loaded with Mark's incriminating texts. She whispered under her breath, "I won't let him get away with this." Not without consequences. Survival demanded secrecy. She would not confront him that afternoon, or even the next day. Grace wanted Mark to remain oblivious, to continue underestimating her. And so, with the cunning her grandmother had instilled, Grace mapped out her silent plan: uncover every lie, prepare for every contingency, and strike only when the time was right. By midday, Mark's phone rang repeatedly. Grace ignored it. Eventually, the calls slowed, and she knew Mark had likely realized his phone was missing. Sure enough, the home's landline rang. Grace picked it up, steadying her voice. "Hey, babe," Mark said, feigning lightness. "I forgot my phone at home. Could you do me a favor and bring it to the office? I have some important messages I need to check." Grace managed a sweet, controlled tone. "Of course, honey. I'll be there in an hour. Don't stress yourself." When she arrived at Mark's downtown Miami office, a sleek skyscraper bearing the Moreno Global Trading logo, she was greeted by his assistant, Amanda Richards. Amanda seemed on edge, glancing over Grace's shoulder as though expecting Mark to appear any moment. Grace handed the phone over and smiled warmly. "He'll need this ASAP," she said. As Amanda thanked her, Grace noticed a nameplate on a large office door across the hall: Valentina Reyes, International Client Relations Director. Her heart skipped a beat. The same name from the text messages. The door was ajar, revealing an impeccably organized desk and modern decor. A quick glance inside showed no occupant at the moment. Grace felt a flicker of intense rage. Was Mark brazen enough to conduct an affair with someone who worked directly under his nose, under the same corporate banner that she partly owned? The audacity made her blood boil. Amanda noticed her staring and seemed to sense the tension. With a sympathetic smile, Amanda spoke in a hushed tone. "Valentina is out for lunch. She's recently joined us, very experienced, and quite close to Mr. Moreno. They travel together a lot to client meetings." Grace forced a polite nod, her mind spinning. She realized the sudden creation of a role International Client Relations Director could easily have been a ploy for Mark to travel with Valentina under the pretense of business. It explained the weekend flights, the exotic dinners, the secret texts. Every puzzle piece was snapping into place. Determined not to betray her knowledge, Grace offered a cordial goodbye to Amanda and left. As she waited for the elevator, she noticed framed photos along the corridor, snapshots of Mark with international partners, handshakes after signing deals, and group pictures from corporate retreats. In one photograph taken a couple of months ago in Madrid, she spotted Valentina standing just behind Mark. The proximity in the photo, the way Valentina's hand almost touched Mark's shoulder, spoke volumes. Grace's heart hardened. She remembered her grandmother's words: "When betrayal strikes, keep your head high and your eyes open. Patience will serve you better than fury." She repeated those words like a mantra, calming herself as she stepped into the elevator. She had confirmed the mistress's identity in broad daylight. Now it was time to gather more intelligence quietly, stealthily, and ensure she had enough leverage to protect herself and the baby. Mark Moreno had made his move. Grace silently vowed that her counterstrike would be decisive. Back home, Grace felt suffocated by the enormity of what she had discovered. She needed someone to talk to, someone she could trust. Her first thought was Elizabeth Carter, her close friend who had survived a tumultuous marriage to a powerful executive. Elizabeth's ex-husband, James Carter, had used every trick in the book to cheat her out of alimony and child support. But Elizabeth, with her sharp intellect and calm determination, had eventually outmaneuvered him in court. Grace dialed Elizabeth's number. When her friend answered, the warmth in her voice eased Grace's anxiety. "Liz, I need your help," Grace said, her voice cracking. Unable to hold back, she poured out the events of the day, the messages from Valentina, the real estate documents, her suspicion that Mark had been hiding more than just an affair. Elizabeth listened intently, only interjecting to ask clarifying questions. Finally, she said, "This is going to be painful, Grace, but you need to protect yourself and your child. Do not confront him yet. Gather as much evidence as you can, financial, personal, anything. Keep your emotions in check. You won't get a second chance." Grace exhaled slowly. "I'm so angry, Liz. I can't believe he'd do this to me, to our unborn child. But yes, I'll be careful." Elizabeth offered a resource. Her own divorce lawyer, Mitchell Lau, who specialized in high net worth cases. "Mitch is discreet," Elizabeth said. "He can advise you on your options, prenuptial clauses, asset division, even custody issues. You need to know what you're up against." Though the idea of contacting a lawyer felt like a betrayal of her marriage vows, Grace realized Mark had already shattered those vows by sleeping with Valentina. She thanked Elizabeth and agreed to meet with Mitchell in secret. That evening, Grace steeled herself when Mark returned home. She greeted him with a soft smile and pretended not to notice his tense expression. He asked for his phone back as soon as he walked through the door. Feigning indifference, Grace handed it over, saying she found it on the kitchen counter. She tried to read his face, searching for guilt or shame. He only managed a faint, half-hearted smile, then disappeared into his study to respond to urgent emails. While Mark locked himself away, Grace rehearsed her next moves. She would meet Mitchell Lau, do more research into Mark's finances, and remain outwardly calm. Even if it tore her apart inside, she had to maintain the facade. She recalled how Mark had once claimed to value her intelligence and cunning. That might be the only compliment of his she still believed. The next day, while Mark was at the office, Grace scheduled her appointment with Mitchell Lau. She was determined to walk into that meeting armed with every detail. Within her phone, she stored a trove of screenshots, proof of Mark's affair, financial holdings, and suspicious transactions. Step by step, Grace was positioning her pieces on the chessboard, preparing for a confrontation that would shake her world to its very core. A week slid by in a tense routine. Mark came and went at odd hours, peppering Grace with half-baked excuses about new business opportunities. Grace responded with practiced smiles and gentle nods, all the while concealing her roiling emotions. During that time, she visited Mitchell Lau's office on Brickell Avenue. The building soared into the sky, reflecting the city's wealth and ambition. Mitchell, a tall, sharp-eyed attorney with a calm demeanor, welcomed Grace in a private conference room. Elizabeth Carter had paved the way, ensuring absolute discretion. "Miss Moreno," Mitchell said with professional courtesy, "Elizabeth told me a bit about your situation. Let's lay everything out on the table so I can advise you effectively." For the next hour, Grace meticulously recounted the affair, Mark's suspicious finances, and the property deeds she had seen in the safe. She handed over a USB drive containing screenshots of text messages and photos, as well as a list of documented properties she knew about. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "You have quite a case, and you're certain you haven't confronted him yet?" Grace shook her head. I've been careful. I want him to underestimate me. That might be wise, Mitchell agreed. In Florida, if Mark is dissipating marital assets or planning to move funds offshore, we need to catch it before it happens. Infidelity, while not always legally significant for property division, can influence negotiations, especially if it's tied to financial misconduct. He also emphasized the importance of a private investigator. Gathering more evidence about his affair and finances will help, especially if you suspect Mark is obscuring assets. I can recommend someone who's very discreet. Though the idea of hiring an investigator felt surreal, Grace understood the necessity. If Mark was as bold as she feared, he might have other secret holdings, and who knew what else he was capable of hiding? Later, in the hush of her bedroom, Grace paced the floor, her mind swirling with possibilities. She knew Mark had overseas connections. He frequently traveled to Asia and Europe. Had he opened offshore accounts? Was Valentina the only mistress, or just the most recent? Determined to follow Mitchell's advice, Grace contacted the recommended private investigator, a woman named Samantha Zhao, known for her meticulous work with high-profile clients. During their brief initial phone call, Samantha explained how she would discreetly monitor Mark's movements, compile financial data, and track patterns. "We'll keep it confidential," she assured Grace. "My job is to give you leverage, not to cause scandal." Grace felt a flicker of relief. She wasn't alone in this anymore. There was a team, a lawyer, an investigator, and a supportive friend who believed her story and stood beside her. She felt momentarily guilty for how clandestine it all was, but she reminded herself that Mark had forced this path by his own deception. Now her objective was simple: gather every piece of incriminating information and wield it when the time came. And when that time arrived, she would be unstoppable. Grace quickly began receiving updates from Samantha Zhao. The private investigator moved with calculated efficiency, blending effortlessly into the background whenever she followed Mark to his business luncheons, late-night dinners, and weekend conferences. Samantha's first major discovery was a recurring pattern of Mark meeting Valentina at a boutique hotel in Miami Beach, the Faena. They would book a suite under an alias, check in separately, and spend hours behind closed doors. Each detail Samantha uncovered felt like a fresh wound to Grace. Yet she pressed on, determined to transform her heartbreak into the power she needed to secure her future and her babies. Samantha also alerted Grace to suspicious banking activities. Mark appeared to be funneling money into a new account under the name MRT Holdings, presumably an acronym to hide ownership. The funds trickled in small increments, at first $10,000 share, $20,000 share, but the amounts grew larger over time. By cross-referencing travel records, Samantha surmised that Mark also maintained a safety deposit box in New York City and possibly had ties to a financial institution in Zurich. Each new piece of data tightened the noose around Mark's elaborate charade. One day, Grace received a text from Samantha. "Surveillance indicates Mark is heading to Vegas next Tuesday with Valentina. They're booked at the Delilah restaurant, private booth, 8 p.m., possibly staying at the Bellagio." Grace's hands shook as she read the message. She recalled the earlier texts she had seen about Vegas. Mark had told her he was traveling to California for business. He didn't even bother to keep his lies straight anymore. Resentment threatened to swamp her, but she reminded herself that outbursts would only tip him off. That evening, Grace sat across from Mark in their grand dining room. She had prepared a simple meal: roasted chicken, fresh vegetables, but her appetite was gone. Mark, on the other hand, seemed ravenous, shoveling food into his mouth while barely looking up. He made idle comments about a quick trip to Anaheim to finalize a shipping contract. Grace forced a smile. "How long will you be gone?" she asked sweetly. "Just 2 nights," he replied. "Shouldn't be too bad. I'll make sure to FaceTime you." She nodded, playing the part of the supportive wife. Inside, she seethed at his shameless audacity. The baby kicked, as if sensing her turmoil. She gently laid a hand on her belly to calm both herself and the child. Once dinner ended, Mark excused himself to field urgent calls, leaving Grace to clear the table alone. She moved through the kitchen in a daze, her mind juggling 1,000 scenarios for the future. In a few days, he would be in Las Vegas with his mistress. Samantha would likely obtain more incriminating evidence. Maybe that would be enough to turn the tide legally. Perhaps she could freeze his assets, file for divorce, or even confront him outright. But the silent plan still held. The time for confrontation was near, but not yet. Patience was her ally, her grandmother's words echoing ever louder. As the trip to Vegas loomed, Grace found it increasingly difficult to maintain her facade. Each time Mark kissed her goodbye or placed a hand on her pregnant belly, she had to fight the impulse to recoil. Sleep evaded her, leaving her exhausted and teetering on the brink of emotional collapse. Still, she stuck to her silent plan, drawing on every shred of willpower. One afternoon, Mark returned home unexpectedly early. Grace was in the study, reviewing newly sent documents from Mitchell Lau. She had arranged them in neat piles, evidence of Mark's affair, questionable financial transfers, offshore account leads, and a timeline of suspicious events. As she heard the front door open, she panicked. There was no time to stash everything away properly. Mark's footsteps echoed in the hallway. Thinking quickly, Grace grabbed a throw blanket from the couch and draped it over the evidence. She then moved to stand casually by the window, feigning interest in the view. Mark entered, frowning slightly. "Hey, didn't expect you back so soon," she said, forcing a cheerful tone. He crossed the room, giving her a cursory peck on the cheek. "Meeting got cancelled," he said. "Figured I'd catch up on some emails here." Grace tensed, hoping he wouldn't notice the blanket on the table. Mark glanced around, his gaze lingering momentarily on the covered papers. For a heartbeat, Grace feared he would lift the blanket, but his phone buzzed at that very moment, diverting his attention. He fished it out of his pocket, muttered something about urgent business, and left the room to take the call. Exhaling in relief, Grace quietly gathered the documents and hurried to their bedroom, where she tucked them inside a large handbag. Her heart hammered as she realized how close she'd come to blowing her cover. The baby shifted again, and Grace whispered, "It's okay. Mommy's got you." Shortly afterward, Mark emerged from his call and retreated to his study. Grace could hear him pacing, his tone brusque as he spoke on the phone. She inched closer to the door, hoping to catch clues. Words like overseas shipment, Valentina, and deadline drifted through the wood. Her pulse quickened. The mention of Valentina in a business call stoked her anger. She wondered if Mark's entire business was entangled with his affair, or if he just used these professional settings to keep Valentina close. Unable to glean more, Grace returned to her bedroom, preparing for the day Mark would leave for Las Vegas. Once he was gone, she and Samantha would move swiftly. Mitchell Lau had already drafted preliminary legal paperwork in case they needed a sudden move. Every step felt perilous, as if she tiptoed along a ledge high above a city. But beneath the fear, a glint of determination burned. She had come too far to falter now. Mark departed for his so-called business trip on a Tuesday morning. Grace stood at the doorway, bidding him goodbye with practiced composure. He kissed her cheek, promised a call, and rolled his suitcase into the waiting car. The moment the car disappeared down the driveway, Grace called Samantha. "He's on his way," she said. "Let me know the moment you have anything." Samantha, already stationed at the Miami airport, confirmed Mark's flight details. By early evening, she texted Grace. "They've landed in Vegas, checked into the Bellagio under separate reservations, meeting for dinner at Delilah Restaurant in 2 hours." Each update felt like a stab to Grace's heart. She pictured Mark and Valentina walking through the ornate lobby of the Bellagio, arms brushing, excitement shimmering between them. She tried to steel herself with the knowledge that every moment they spent together was another nail in Mark's coffin. The moral weight still tormented her, but anger gave her focus. Samantha managed to secure photos from a distance grainy cell phone shots that showed Mark and Valentina heading into the restaurant together. Later, there was footage of them laughing, leaning in close, sipping expensive cocktails. It was a brazen, public display of affection, as though Mark believed himself immune to consequences. Grace stored each image Samantha forwarded in a secret digital folder labeled Insurance. Back in Miami, she met briefly with Mitchell Lau at his office. The tension in her posture was evident as she handed him a fresh batch of evidence. "I don't know how many more nights I can do this," she confessed, tears threatening. "But I need to see this through." Mitchell offered a steady gaze. "Every piece of evidence strengthens your position. By the time we're done, Mark won't have any plausible defense." He paused, checking that the door to his office was shut. If he's been transferring or hiding funds, this also counts against him, especially if he's spending company money on personal affairs. Grace nodded. "He's been using the company jet more frequently too. I suspect he's blurring the lines between business and personal trips." "Even better for us," Mitchell said, though he softened his tone, recognizing her heartbreak. "We'll build a thorough case. Just hang on a bit longer." That night, Grace lay awake in their king-sized bed, staring at the empty space beside her. She couldn't help but imagine Mark in a plush hotel suite across the country, Valentina wrapped in his arms. The baby kicked as if protesting, and Grace tried to quell her rolling stomach. Everything in her screamed to confront him, to yell, to throw him out, but she reminded herself of what was at stake. She needed a solid legal position, both for her future and her child's. In that sleepless darkness, she made one more vow. Once she executed her plan and confronted him, there would be no turning back. Everything Mark had built, his public image, his business empire, his illusions would come crashing down. She prayed that she would have the strength to endure it. By Thursday, Mark returned from Las Vegas. He strode into the house, a bouquet of flowers in hand, greeting Grace with studied enthusiasm. She accepted the flowers with a forced smile, noticing they were her favorite lilies. An attempt at guilt-driven romance, she mused darkly. He recounted tales of productive meetings in Anaheim, bragging about new partnerships that would take Moreno Global Trading to the next level. Grace nodded politely, playing the role of dutiful wife while inwardly loathing every lie. But the next morning, something odd occurred. Samantha Zhao reported difficulties accessing certain financial records. Accounts that were previously open for scrutiny seemed to have vanished or locked behind additional firewalls. Mark's phone records abruptly showed signs of tampering, numbers erased, data wiped. It was as though Mark sensed someone was onto him. Grace felt a jolt of panic. Had Mark discovered her plan? She walked around the house, scanning for signs that he'd noticed anything amiss. Had he checked her phone, rummaged through her emails? She hadn't left evidence around, but her near accident in the study still haunted her. Desperate for answers, Grace contacted Elizabeth Carter, who offered her typical cool-headed advice. "If Mark suspects something, he might be covering his tracks," Elizabeth said, "but he's not likely to confront you unless he has proof you're snooping. He might just be cautious by nature. Still, you have to be extra careful." That afternoon, Grace found Mark in his home office, locked in animated conversation over the phone. She overheard snippets, words like audit, cybersecurity, and confidential. Her stomach twisted. Mark might be employing someone to tighten the company's systems, possibly hiring experts to sniff out unauthorized surveillance. If Samantha's digital tracks were uncovered, the entire plan could collapse. Maintaining calm, Grace knocked gently on the door. Mark ended the call abruptly. "Yes?" he asked, his voice strained. "I was wondering if you'd like coffee," Grace offered. A simple, domestic gesture to gauge his mood. His eyes flickered, and for a fleeting moment, Grace sensed suspicion. Then he relaxed, gave a short nod. "Sure, thanks." She turned away, heart pounding. She couldn't shake the feeling that Mark was on alert. Any slip-up now could be catastrophic. The child within her gave a firm kick, almost as if scolding her to stay resolute. Late that night, after Mark fell asleep, Grace crept into the living room and called Samantha. They spoke in whispers. Samantha confirmed that Mark's team had introduced new cybersecurity measures. "I can't access certain logs anymore," she said, "but I have enough to prove he's funneling money offshore. The direct link to Valentina's personal accounts is fuzzy now, but we know there was at least one transaction." Tension coiled inside Grace. She had hoped to gather more evidence before making a move. But if Mark was securing his digital fortresses, time was running short. She would have to strike soon, and strike hard. The window of opportunity to confront him on her terms was shrinking. The pressure weighed heavily on Grace. Each day she acted the part of a calm, expectant mother, while inside she felt as though she were waging a silent war. She clung to her silent plan, yet a gnawing fear consumed her. What if Mark was a step ahead? On a Friday evening, Mark announced he was hosting a business dinner at home. Several top-level executives from Moreno Global Trading would attend, including Valentina. The news tightened a knot in Grace's stomach. This would be her first official encounter with the mistress. But she played along, forcing an excited smile. Mark ordered their personal chef to prepare an elaborate menu. He made a grand show of rearranging the living room and setting the dining table with expensive china. Grace hovered at the periphery, discreetly observing his interactions with the staff. His urgency, his attention to detail, it was as if he was determined to impress someone special. The guests arrived in sleek cars just after dusk. One by one, Grace greeted them at the door with polite warmth. When Valentina stepped forward, Grace recognized her immediately from the photos. She was statuesque, with glossy black hair swept into an elegant updo. She wore a striking designer dress that clung to her figure, and she offered Grace a brilliant smile. "You must be Grace," Valentina said, her voice dripping with graciousness. Grace swallowed the bile rising in her throat and forced a smile. "Yes, lovely to finally meet you, Valentina. Mark speaks very highly of you." They exchanged pleasantries, and Grace couldn't help but notice the spark in Valentina's eyes when she glanced at Mark. It took all of Grace's strength not to shatter a champagne glass, just to break the facade. During dinner, Grace played hostess, gliding between conversations, ensuring wine glasses were filled and politely engaging with the executives. Mark boasted about new ventures, expansions into Asian markets, and upcoming deals in Europe. Valentina nodded along, occasionally adding her own input about client relations. Anyone who didn't know better would have presumed she was just another dedicated employee. But Grace observed the subtle glances, the brush of fingertips under the table when they thought no one was watching. Her fury simmered and her appetite vanished. Yet she maintained her composure, mindful that a single misstep could ruin everything. She was waiting for the perfect moment, that crucial time to leverage every piece of evidence and secure her future and her babies. As the dinner wound down, Mark stood and offered a toast, praising his team for their hard work. Valentina clinked glasses with him, smiling as though she held some private joke. Grace felt an almost dizzying disorientation. She was living in a surreal tableau, a proud husband, a devoted wife, a charismatic mistress, and a room full of bystanders, unaware of the ticking bomb beneath the surface. But soon, the mask would come off. With Samantha's latest findings and Mitchell's legal maneuvers, Grace was poised for the ultimate confrontation. She only needed a trigger, one last push, to catapult Mark's world into full collapse. 2 days after the dinner, Grace received a final file from Samantha, a trove of damning evidence tying Mark's offshore accounts directly to hush money payments for Valentina's lavish lifestyle. Hotel bills, flight itineraries, private shopping trips, it was all there, meticulously documented. That evening, Mark announced he was leaving for yet another overnight business meeting. Grace knew this was the moment. She called Elizabeth, who arrived under the guise of a friendly visit. Together, they waited until Mark packed his bag and headed for the door. Once he was gone, Grace summoned Maria Vasquez, the longtime housekeeper, and asked her to take an impromptu evening off. Confused but concerned for Grace's well-being, Maria complied. Minutes later, Grace texted Mark, instructing him to come back immediately. She pretended she had a pregnancy emergency. Panic must have gripped him, because he rushed home without protest, arriving in less than an hour. He burst through the door, eyes wide. "Grace, what's wrong?" She stood in the living room, Elizabeth by her side. The tension in the air was palpable. Grace's hand rested on her swollen belly, and she felt a steely calm settle over her. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low. Mark glanced uneasily at Elizabeth. "Shouldn't we do this privately?" Elizabeth folded her arms. "I'm here for support, for Grace." Confusion and frustration flickered across Mark's face. "Okay," he said warily. "What's going on?" Grace drew in a shaky breath. "I know about the affair, Mark, with Valentina." She steadied her voice. "I know about the offshore accounts, the money you've been siphoning, and the secret trips. I know you've been lying to me." Mark's face went pale, then twisted into defensiveness. "Grace, you don't understand. It's not what you think." She raised a hand to silence him. "I have proof. Detailed records, photos, messages. This ends now." Silence hung heavy. Outside, the distant rumble of thunder underscored the gravity of the moment. Mark swallowed hard, searching for a way out. "We can work this out." "I swear to you, I never meant—" "Stop," Grace interrupted. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. I have everything I need to file for divorce, seize marital assets, and ensure the baby and I are financially protected." Mark's eyes darted between Grace and Elizabeth. His bravado faltered. "Please, don't do this," he whispered, voice cracking. "We can fix this. I'll end things with Valentina." "It was just a mistake." Grace shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "A mistake is a one-time lapse. You've been living a double life, Mark. You betrayed our marriage, our future. You gambled our child's stability on your lies." She exhaled shakily. "I'm done." Elizabeth handed Grace a folder containing the paperwork Mitchell Lau had prepared. Grace placed it on the coffee table. "Sign these, an immediate separation agreement. I'm not giving you the chance to hide more assets or manipulate the situation. You sign, or I'll go public with all of this." Mark stared at the folder, sweat beading on his forehead. Thunder rumbled again, and a flash of lightning illuminated his panic-stricken face. For a moment, Grace felt a pang of sadness, remembering the man she'd once admired. But the memory dissolved in the wake of his betrayal. Snatching a pen, he began to sign, his hand trembling. With each stroke, the empire he had built on false promises and secret affairs started to crumble. When Mark finished signing, he set the pen down with a shaky hand, refusing to meet Grace's gaze. In the silence that followed, Elizabeth gathered the documents, slipping them into her briefcase. The reality of the situation settled like a dense fog in the room. Grace felt both devastated and oddly liberated. She pressed a protective hand against her belly. Now, no matter how difficult the path ahead, she had ensured her child's financial security. The separation agreement listed immediate conditions. Mark would temporarily move out, provide spousal support, and freeze any further transfers from their joint accounts. A formal divorce filing would follow within weeks. Elizabeth quietly slipped out, giving Grace and Mark a moment alone. Mark sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "I never wanted to hurt you," he mumbled. "I just got carried away. The business, the power, Valentina. I lost sight of what really mattered." Grace blinked back tears, the ache in her chest overwhelming. "You destroyed what we had, Mark. I believed in you. You let me down us down." He looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. "I know. I'm sorry. Please, Grace, let's find a way back." She shook her head. "There's no going back to the life we had. It wasn't real, at least not for you. You want to fix something for our child's sake? Cooperate with the lawyers. Be honest for once in your life. That's the only chance you have to salvage anything." Defeated, Mark bowed his head, whispering words of remorse. Grace fought the urge to comfort him. Once, she would have done so without question. But now, trust had been shattered. His tears, his apologies, could not bridge the gaping chasm he created. Tension crackled in the air. The storm outside intensified, rain hammering against the windows. Mark staggered to his feet, gathering the last remnants of his dignity. "I'll pack a bag and go," he said quietly. "I'll respect the agreement." Grace offered no farewell. She watched him ascend the stairs, feeling oddly disconnected from the moment. The man who had once swept her off her feet with grand gestures was now reduced to a husk, forced to leave the home he once cherished. A short time later, Mark descended with a small suitcase, eyes avoiding Grace's. She walked him to the door, stopping just short of the threshold. The weight of finality pressed against them. In a soft voice, Grace said, "I meant what I said about the baby. If you want to be involved, do it through the right channels. Don't lie again." Mark nodded miserably. He stepped out into the storm, the door closing behind him with an echoing thud. For a long moment, Grace stood there, chest tight, tears slipping down her cheeks. She was free, but at a steep cost. All illusions were gone. Now, she had to face life as a single, expectant mother fighting for a future where betrayal had no place. The days following Mark's departure were a whirlwind of legal appointments, emotional upheaval, and unexpected relief. With Mark out of the house, Grace finally felt she could breathe. However, she was left to navigate a maze of complicated finances, looming court proceedings, and the heartbreak of losing the man she thought she knew. Elizabeth proved to be an unwavering pillar of support. She connected Grace with a financial advisor, Patricia Weaver, who specialized in restructuring assets post-separation. Patricia helped Grace create a clear snapshot of her finances, ensuring Mark couldn't siphon more funds. The child support terms, spelled out in the separation agreement, guaranteed security for the baby once born. Grace moved through each day with a new sense of purpose. Mornings were dedicated to gentle exercise and prenatal checkups. She decorated the nursery in soft, neutral tones, a space of calm and love untouched by Mark's betrayal. Afternoons found her in conference calls with Mitchell Lau, hammering out the finer details of the divorce. Evenings were spent quietly journaling, processing the cascade of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. One afternoon, she received a surprising call from an old acquaintance, Catherine Sinclair, a journalist for a prominent Miami magazine. Catherine had caught wind of Mark's sudden step down from daily operations at Moreno Global Trading. Intrigued by the hush around it, she reached out to Grace. "Word on the street is that Mark is taking an indefinite leave," Catherine said delicately, fishing for information. Though tempted to spill everything, Grace measured her response. "We're dealing with private matters," she said. "I'd appreciate discretion for the sake of our baby." Catherine respected her wishes, hinting that any official statement would be reported sensitively. Grace thanked her and ended the call, her heart racing. The world was starting to notice cracks in Mark's public facade. If the media dug deeper, they could uncover everything. For now, Grace wanted to keep the scandal contained, focusing on her own healing rather than fueling tabloids. Weeks turned into a month. The divorce was in motion. Mark's mistress had retreated from the spotlight, though rumor had it she was still on the payroll, perhaps biding her time. Mark's attempts to contact Grace were sporadic, ranging from tearful voicemails to empty promises of change. She had Mitchell handle all communications, safeguarding her fragile emotions. And in the quiet of early dawn, when the baby kicked as if to greet the sunrise, Grace felt a surge of hope. Despite the betrayal, despite the chaos, she was carving out a path where she and her child would thrive. The empire Mark built might survive in some form, but Grace no longer needed to cling to it for her worth. She had found strength in the ashes of deceit, a strength that reminded her of her grandmother's wisdom. Sometimes you must let the old structures crumble to build something new and indestructible. 5 months later, Grace stood in her baby's nursery, gazing at the crib that she and Elizabeth had assembled. The walls were painted a soft sage green, adorned with gentle watercolor prints of forests and animals. Plush blankets and stuffed toys were neatly arranged, waiting for the newest member of the Moreno family to arrive. Her belly was now round and heavy, a testament to the miracle growing inside her. As she ran her hand across her stomach, she felt a firm kick, followed by a series of smaller flutters. She smiled, whispering, "Not long now, little one." Legally, she was nearly divorced. Most of the papers were in order, and Mark had relinquished control of many joint assets to her. While the negotiations had been grueling, Mark eventually recognized he had little leverage against the mountain of evidence. In the end, he chose partial cooperation to avoid a full-blown scandal. Valentina had resigned from Moreno Global Trading shortly after Mark's affair came to light within the company's inner circles. Word traveled quickly among high-level executives, and Mark had little choice but to request her resignation to minimize public relations damage. No official announcement was made, but insiders whispered about the real reasons for her departure. Valentina faded back into whatever life she had before, leaving Mark to pick up the pieces. One afternoon, Mitchell called with final good news. The divorce settlement was signed by a judge. It was official. Grace would maintain primary custody once the baby was born, with Mark granted supervised visitation if he chose to be involved. Financially, Grace was set, with a substantial trust established for their child. She hung up the phone, tears streaming down her face, tears of liberation, relief, and lingering sadness. That evening, Elizabeth and Maria threw a small celebration for Grace at the house. A modest dinner, laughter, and heartfelt toasts filled the space that once echoed with Mark's presence. They toasted to new beginnings and second chances. Grace found herself smiling in earnest, feeling gratitude amidst the pain she had endured. Before heading to bed, Grace wandered onto the balcony, the moonlight casting a silvery glow across the lush yard. She breathed in the night air, letting the tranquility settle into her bones. Her journey had been anything but smooth, a labyrinth of betrayal, heartbreak, legal battles, but she had emerged with her dignity and her future intact. As she rested her hand on her belly, she imagined the life she would create for her child, one built on honesty, resilience, and unconditional love. No longer chained to Mark's deceptions, Grace could finally chart her own course. Though the road ahead wasn't guaranteed to be easy, she was equipped with lessons learned from the darkest corners of betrayal. In that quiet moment, Grace made a promise to herself and her unborn child. We will live free from lies, anchored in truth, and guided by hope. With the final chapter of her marriage closed, she welcomed the dawn of a new life that was entirely her own. In the wake of heartbreak and hidden truths, Grace Moreno forged a path of courage and redemption for herself and her unborn child. Freed from Mark's betrayals, she discovered that even the deepest wounds could spark an inner fire of determination. Her silent plan brought a deceptive empire to its knees, proving that with resilience and resolve, a single step forward can become a leap toward freedom. If you found yourself wrapped up in Grace's powerful story, her fears, her bravery, and her unwavering love for her baby, don't let the journey end here. Hit the like button, share this video with those who appreciate a gripping tale of resilience, and subscribe for more real-life drama fiction that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Your support ensures that we can continue creating stories that capture the intensity of the human spirit.